Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Talent GTM podcast. I'm your host, Krissy Manzano, and today our guest is Peter On. I'm so excited to talk with him about the leadership deficit, right? Why startups break at the top. And so, just a little bit of background on Peter. He has over 16 years in enterprise sales experience at companies like Google, Dropbox, Slack, Front, and Twingate. He has closed multi-million-dollar deals for large Fortune 50 and 500 organizations and even early stage. And he's helped over 100 startups build sales from the ground up. And with all the experience, it's no wonder that he is fully capable of advising everyone from first-time founders to veteran sales leaders on authentic messaging, pricing, pitch prep, enterprise deal coaching, and leadership development. What a resume. They always are for the folks that come on here. But welcome, Peter. So glad to have you, and definitely warranted for you to talk on this topic, right? About what's going on with leaders at startups. Why are things breaking in this new, era that we're in? So glad to have you.
Totally. Thank you so much for having me on. It's an honor. And I felt like over our first couple conversations, we were on the same wavelength. So excited to dig in further on this topic.
Yeah, no, me too. I've been looking forward to this, and it's something that I think as we talk about it, it's going to resonate. But it also is a question that everyone asks, right? Why all of these founders, they come from Ivy League, they've got high EQ, very technical. So why is it that so many of them are brilliant and they struggle when it comes to actually leading a team and their go to market, maybe even?
I mean, I think there's a couple reasons. One is, yeah, like you said, a lot of these are young, brilliant founders who've never even managed a team before, right? They might be brilliant coders, and in the age of founder-led sales, a lot of these folks have credibility because they can build the product directly. But that doesn't necessarily translate to how you listen to your team, how you build empathy with individuals who
Right.
are, also jumping into the startup game for the first time. I think there does take a little bit of experience and leadership experience specifically to get used to that. The other thing too is I think like a lot of founders also have natural instincts for leadership, but the mentorship isn't really there, right? A lot of the advice, especially in my world, comes from venture capital.
Mhm.
And a lot of the venture capital, a lot of the firms have brilliant board members, brilliant partners. A lot of them are my friends. I get a lot of lead flow from them and business from them as well. But first of all, they're spread thin. And secondly, oftentimes they don't have domain expertise in places like sales or marketing, right? Where a lot of these
Right.
founders are looking for guidance on how to lead a sales motion for the first time or a marketing motion for the first time. So I think there's that combination of lack of experience, and then also sometimes pressure that comes from where the capital is coming from, which is, from these firms who are like, hey, you need to grow fast. Let me give you some advice. But, again, like a lot of these portfolios are one of hundreds, or a lot of these portfolio companies are one of
Yeah.
hundreds.
Genuine question. Why is that acceptable in your view? That to know that there's this gap, right? Of
Hmm.
understanding how to be a leader. And do you think the firms really recognize what they lack as far as the mentorship? Or do you think, no, they feel like they have it covered, so they're okay investing millions into a very smart individual on paper who can build a product, but doesn't understand how to lead or it, and they think they have that, so it's fine. Like, where do you think
Yeah.
that comes from? And maybe it's not like a clear answer, but curious.
No, I mean, I think it's a great question. I think it's because a lot of companies have succeeded financially in spite of poor leadership, let's be honest, right? Like we all know those founders who are not well respected within their
Mhm.
employees, but somehow they still get 3, 4, 5, 10, $20 billion valuations, right? So I think it's because the headlines and the success or ROI of the investment doesn't always match up to strong leadership, right?
Yep.
So I do think people sometimes overlook that, but I also think those are the exception, not the norm. There's also a lot of companies where if they had great leadership, folks who really truly are looking for VPs and lieutenants who have empathy, humility, who actually like invest in their young startup workers. Like if that were to happen, I think there would be a lot more success cases. But truth of the matter is, I think we sometimes gravitate towards the success cases where it happens in spite of strong leadership.
Yep.
So
No,
that's
that
my
makes
honest
sense.
feeling. Yeah.
One more question on that, because I know we have a lot more to cover,
Yeah.
but and I haven't looked at this data-wise, so, maybe this is here and this would help answer my question. But how you often hear from the investor standpoint, right? That there's a small percentage that are successful, right?
Yep.
Of the ones that they invest in.
Yep.
So if it's a small percentage that are successful, I guess from that playbook, essentially, does this really work that well? And then I also say, how valuable is a valuation if it never comes to fruition? Because I think we all saw all of these valuations that were over inflated, even, and I won't say the company on here, but there's one, they made a bunch of documentaries about it,
Hmm.
and it literally never made any money. And the owner
Yeah.
still got a massive payout. And so I struggle with a little bit of that because I wonder, how are we defining success if the company is never profitable, right? But
Yeah.
they have a $5 billion valuation. That's always interesting to me.
Yeah, sure. And like, I mean, there's a recent example of like Deal and Rippling too, right? Like you heard that whole
Right.
saga,
Yes,
like the
yes,
corporate
yes.
espionage
Yeah,
situation, right? Like
right.
I'm sure they'll make a TV show off of that. Yeah, but I'm sure like the executives there aren't hurting to your point, right? And actually maybe the investment is a lot less from kind of like a VC standpoint, but um there's it's like a kind of law of large numbers, right? That's one situation, and we almost kind of expect that to happen now, which I think is sad,
Yeah, sure.
where we kind of now like we talk about it for a couple weeks and then there's going to be another founder who has kind of similar values and does similar things, but in the grand scheme of things, folks are still making a ton of money in tech. But I think it's short-sighted because what people don't realize is within my generation and below, right? So people younger than me, there's huge reputational risk that these firms and also companies are going to find out about, I think, where folks know who the VC firms are who are pushing these like old school VPs of sales who are not very good,
Mhm.
right? And people know who the founders are who aren't really great at leadership but happen to sell a product that flew off the shelves for a short period of time. And I think that there's like a ton of costs in that people don't realize because it's not
Yes.
necessarily doesn't necessarily show up in the headlines, um, but will show up, when that founder tries to hire again or hire great talent,
Yeah.
right? So,
Yeah. No, that makes sense. What do you think is the biggest myth founders believe about leadership?
yeah, I think the biggest myth is that folks who have really strong resumes are responsible for the growth of companies. Like, I think, it makes sense if you think about it that one person is not responsible for a company's growth from 0 to 100. But a lot of founders, I still hear them say, oh, this guy or gal, she was there from 0 to 100 and kind of grew the whole thing from nothing. And I always like, a part of me dies when I hear that because a lot of times people, are at companies riding the wave, not building it, right? But I still think there's this myth out there that resume and experience trumps actually like skill set and acumen. And you can never replace skill set and acumen. Um, and so I think that there's like a myth around experienced folks and what they can do because just because they did something from 0 to 25, 50, 100 million, it doesn't mean they can replicate it, because they were probably part of the puzzle, not building the entire ship.
Yep. I think that is so spot on. And I think there are a lot of cases where leaders are a part of that growth in riding the ship, right? And that's not their fault. It just is what it is. But at the same time, there are also people that have helped with that growth. But to your point, they can't replicate it because just because you're growing from, 25 million to 50 million, the way that you do that at another company is not always the same. And I think people are too black and white on this experience of growth of revenue is going, if they don't have that experience, they're not going to understand, what we need to do here. And I'm not saying that to some degree that doesn't matter, but you still have to assess. if they have the
Totally.
right skills and behaviors, because they could have at that other company, right? We've all hired out of our network and it
Yes.
wasn't a good hire. Even if they were super successful with us at previous orgs, right? We all like just think about that one person, right? Or maybe it's multiple, I don't know. This
Yeah.
person was so good. They worked with me at all these places. They crushed it and they didn't crush it here. And it wasn't because
Yeah.
they got bad all of a sudden. It wasn't because their successes weren't real beforehand. It was because this place required different skills
Yeah,
that
there's
we
no
assumed
playbook
were the
that
same.
works, right,
Yes,
across every single industry. And
exactly.
yeah, there's not playbooks, there's principles and approaches, I think, which is why I
I
love
love
to
that.
see how leaders like collaborate and communicate and take feedback during the interview process, because especially in early stage, like that's where I spend a lot of my time.
Yeah.
Execution is king of above strategy, right? Because you're
Yep.
probably going to need to try 10 to 15 things before figuring out one or two that work.
Yep.
And I think a lot of folks are stuck in this model of like, I did this at Google or Dropbox or Slack. And so I'm going to do the same thing here without really thinking from first principles, right?
Yep. Totally. No, great advice. When a team starts breaking down, how can you tell if it's a leadership issue versus a talent issue?
Yeah. So, and do you mean from like leadership issue from the CEO or VP of sales or all levels? Like, what are we talking? Like, are
Great
we
question.
like trying to
I would
figure
say
out if the
maybe,
sales leader is not doing well? Yeah.
well, I would say start with like who the team reports directly to, but maybe, there's also a second parallel of, is it leadership above that person that they report to, right? So,
Sure, sure. Yeah, so we could focus on VP of sales maybe first.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think one of the things that, I mean, is very, it seems obvious, but a lot of people I don't think like look at this with a fine tooth comb, and is just look at the person's calendar, right? And depending on the stage of company, for example, if I'm at a Series A company and I'm at a VP of sales and I have barely any like enablement sessions, or I'm not really on calls with my reps, that's probably a leadership problem, right?
Yep.
Because I've seen time and time again, VP of sales get hired from like a 10,000 person org, and they're used to being Mr. or Mrs. Dashboards. And then they join and the reps are taking calls, and the reps don't need dashboards. They actually need on the field help, right? Like
Yeah.
positioning and messaging the product.
Yeah.
So I think like looking at the calendar first, like where is this person's time being spent based off of the stage of company is important. Right now, if you were at like a more mature company, maybe you do need to optimize more at a high level, right? And you still
Mhm.
need to be enabling the field, but maybe there is a place for like optimizing dashboards and working more with RevOps. But like looking at the mix of time spent based off of their schedule, I think is like really eye opening. And then the second thing I would say is, how does the leader actually communicate with his or her peers? So much of startup sales, especially, is about how you actually educate other people, in my opinion. And I've
Mhm.
seen kind of VPs of sales or marketing leaders kind of go away into their silos. And so now like we like live in Slack in this remote era. It kind of boggles my mind sometimes when I like talk to a CEO who's like, yeah, my VP of sales hasn't actually provided an update in Slack in our sales channel like since the time he's been here. And it's like, that's kind of crazy, right?
Yeah.
Because if you're not doing that, how do other leaders know how they can best support you? Right. And it doesn't have to be that tactical like message. And so that's not the point. And the point is like, are you actually educating your CPO and CTO on what your team needs? Because sales is
Yep.
a team sport. And so I think hopefully that starts to get at your question. I think it's
Yeah.
really like down to the tactical nuts and bolts. Like, what are they actually doing day to day? And I feel like a lot of people over index on like, oh, this person speaks really well at all hands, so they must have their shit together. but
Right.
but
Right.
that is like one snippet of the job. And so like I think like looking at somebody's calendar, how they're spending time, and then how are you actually learning about sales? If you're an executive wondering, is there a
Yeah.
leadership or team problem? I think that answers a lot.
Totally. I think to your point, going to the calendar piece to me, if I'm like summarizing that, it's do you understand your team? And that's different than micromanaging, right?
Yo, totally.
And
Yeah.
even if you have managers and you're a VP of sales, right? Or you're a CRO, do you understand your team and what's going on? Have you taken the time to dig in? Or do you consider yourself so busy that you don't have the time to dig in? The most successful leaders I see will dig in, right? In a
Yeah.
non-micro manager way, right? And it's just you brought up all hands and it reminds me of a company I used to work at. and they had just hired a new like CRO, and at our all hands, he was supposed to share his fun fact, and I kid you not, his fun fact was, I've never taken a day off of work
Oh my
in
gosh.
23 years. And everyone just in front of tons of people. And we all just looked at each other like, is he joking? Is this
Yeah.
this is
There's
a
a
joke. He was dead
huge lack of
serious.
EQ there.
Dead
Wow.
serious. But he
Wow.
was brought in because he had that experience for growing at other companies and was a horrible culture fit.
Of
And he
course.
rode the wave that was already going, but
Of
it
course.
was not able to go to where they fully wanted. So it was just when you said that, it was just interesting. But he's a perfect example of what you're
Yeah.
describing.
It's funny how like these behavioral things just kind of don't or like people ignore them during the interview process
Mm-hmm.
and just index on, oh yeah, this person was at Microsoft. We had a VP, another fun story, who at a previous company of mine, I won't name which one, but he was self-proclaimed top 100 VPs in Microsoft. And so I was like, how do you say that with a straight face? Like, oh, I'm top 100 VP of Microsoft, right?
Right.
That was a red flag. And then his fun fact was, oh, I come from this startup. You might have heard of it, Microsoft. And I live in the same neighborhood as my friend Bill Gates, right? so so talk about like, trying to meet your team, right? Like I think there's
Wow.
like so much of a gap of like connecting with people that is
Yeah.
just very basic human to human that a lot of these VPs miss because they've been kind of applauded their entire career.
Yeah. Well, I think what's going to be really interesting is as we transform into this new era of AI, right? There's still a lot of bets out there. But we know
Mm-hmm.
it's here, and we
Mm-hmm.
know it's
Yep.
happening. We just don't all know like what it will fully look like, right? Everyone's making
Sure.
their guesses.
Yep.
We've seen the model, the Silicon Valley model of spend at all cost, hire at all cost. You need to become a unicorn. That's the only way we're identifying success. And we've
Mm-hmm.
seen how that worked out. And while there are companies that have exited, what we know is that there are fewer companies than ever that continues to go down that actually become public and
Mm-hmm.
become successful.
Yep.
We know that there are less successful exits. This whole trend is not, actually increasing. We know that there's less success, and there's more blowups. There's more drama, corruption. All of
Mm-hmm.
these things are going to be exposed as we move into AI. One of the things that I think is going to be so key, my prediction, is that being a human
Yeah.
and being able to connect and actually present something that AI will never fully be able to on a full human level, right? Like you can't
Completely agree.
meeting with me in person is different than if you use a computer, even if it's an avatar, right? And I don't know all the specifics, but I think I was listening to Sam Altman talk about this, like, right? I just think there's this inhuman experience that's going to be so valuable. And I think that's where this model, because you're starting to see people want to go fast again with AI, right? And we're seeing like,
Mm-hmm.
another company that was in the news, right? That had, said, we're going to replace this whole job. And come to find out,
You can't.
multiple companies came forward and said, I've never been a client of theirs, right? And so we're seeing all of this stuff happen again.
Oh yeah,
Um,
totally. Yeah, I
and
think I know which one you're talking
yeah,
about. Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
sure. It was only a
yeah,
few weeks, surprisingly, in the news, but
yeah. You're
we're
right.
seeing
Yeah,
we're seeing all of these things happen, and I just think that AI might be. I thought we already hit the tipping point. I think AI might be the tipping point to take that to another level with leadership, right?
I
Of like
completely
what's going to be
agree.
expected.
Yeah,
We'll
I
see.
think what you're talking about is like currency and leadership used to be based off of like a big exit, to your point.
Hmm.
But now I think currency, like the value that you bring is going to be, I actually liked working with this person and learned something from this person, and this person invested in my career. I think those leaders longer term are going to be able to build strong teams,
Yeah,
right? Because there's so many
a
leaders who
hundred
have hit
percent.
the jackpot who I wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole.
Right,
Right? Like if they
right.
asked me to work for them and they were at the next $100 billion company, I'd be like, no, thank you. Right. And that used to be the case, but now I think people don't follow the valuations anymore because they're all very frothy, or they were.
Hmm. Yep.
They're following like repetition in leadership and folks who are empathetic and can actually provide value on a human level.
Yep. I totally agree. I do think the currency changes, right? Um,
Yeah, totally.
and that might mean that the things that you're not good at are actually going to matter a lot, when we come into this new world of how companies start and grow and what that looks like.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
you've worked with a lot of founders, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
What separates the ones, let's move into this, the ones who grow into actual leaders from the ones that don't? We've touched on this a little bit, but would love to kind of hear your, view of that.
Yeah, so the ones that grow into actual leaders take the craft of learning something they don't know very seriously. And let me break that down for you. So I'm oftentimes a deal coach for my founders, right? They're trying to close their first 5 to 10 deals, and they're
Yep.
like, Peter, I've never done enterprise sales. How do I do this? There's some founders who you could tell they're listening, but they're not absorbing. And there's other founders right after the coaching session, they're slacking me, being like, hey, Peter, is the wording on this email appropriate for an SVP, right? In IT, right? And the folks who are like the most tactical and ask the most basic questions are the future leaders, if that makes sense,
Yeah.
right? The folks who aren't future leaders, like they'll kind of paper over the the frameworks and they'll kind of do the thing, but they won't ask you many questions
Yeah.
because they're like, oh, I've heard this somewhere. Like I don't really want to send Peter this call because maybe they're embarrassed or they think the call went really well. My best clients are like, hey, I don't know what the heck is going on. Can you like pick apart every single dynamic of this deal? Right.
Yeah.
And so I think those are the most successful because they learn at a faster pace because of they're not afraid of what they know, they're afraid of what they don't know, if that makes sense.
Yep.
And so they are constantly like trying to workshop and accelerate the learning of something like sales because they know if they want to hire somebody, they need to know like what great looks like.
Yeah.
And so
No.
those are like the clients that I love working with. There's, no surprise, very coachable, very moldable.
Right.
And
Very
in the
curious.
yeah, in the beginning, they're like, "Hey, like, I know this is a stupid question, but," and then I know that question is actually gonna be a great question
Yeah.
because they're literally trying to figure out the details, and, I think these detail-oriented clients do really, really well. They don't assume to know anything.
Yep. No, I love that. It's such a simple thing at the end of the day that can be so hard to get folks to actually implement, right? And
Yes,
just that whole
yes.
there's never a time where you should stop wanting to learn, whether you're a founder or not. The minute that you think, I have clout, I have experience, therefore I don't need to be digging in, is the minute that things start to go downhill. It's the reason why trust me, age bias exists. But it's
Yeah,
also the
totally.
reason why we see sometimes like an older generation struggle in getting a job, because the reality is there are several that will say, I have all this experience, so I don't need anything outside of like showing you this experience to have this job, right? That is also
Yes.
reality on top of age bias being a reality. And
Yes.
don't not understanding that you just because you've done this for 20 years doesn't matter. Like you have to show that you're curious and understand, are willing to learn and continue diving in, and you're not done learning. So
Yeah, yeah. I mean, even me, I'm not done learning about
no,
sales, right? And I'm a
no.
sales coach,
Yeah,
right?
right,
So
right, totally.
and 16 years is nothing compared to somebody who's been selling for 30 years. So there's always something I need to
Right.
learn, and I'm learning from my clients too, by the way, right?
Yeah,
So I
exactly.
think
Yeah.
a lot of people don't necessarily take that mentality, but I try and self-select for that type of clientele, which is why I ask to see just one call first, because how they receive the feedback says everything I need to know about whether or not I can impact them.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's it. Well said, right? It's like you've never mastered anything.
Yes.
You can
Yeah.
always continue trying.
Exactly.
Last question for you on
Yeah.
this. If you could give one piece of advice to a first-time founder, maybe they've just raised their seed round or they've gotten Series A, right? And they have that product market fit, and they're
hmm
about to start hiring. What would it be?
Yeah. I think my advice would be don't be afraid to take bets on people who have non-traditional backgrounds if you're looking for like your first seller, right? So I've hired a lot of folks who are, former lawyers or consultants. I'm actually coaching a team right now where their entire go-to-market team is former consultants. But the questions they ask are so refreshing because they're coming at this from an outsider's perspective and from like a trust building perspective with their
Right.
clients versus like, oh, I need to like map a sales framework. So that's my
Mhm.
one advice for hiring ICs. Don't be afraid to take bets. For heads of sales, because you are going to need to hire heads of sales sometimes, right? As a
Yes.
Series A founder, if you're wanting to build the team from the get go, and there's too many leads to handle, um, don't be afraid to ask them to do very tactical things in the interview process, right? So I've heard founders say, Peter, like, I don't want to offend this VP of sales and tell him to do a pitch deck on our company and present it to us like as if he's an AE because he's beyond that. He's above that or she's above that. And I always tell the founders, you have to make them do it because a lot of experienced people don't know how to sell, believe it or not. So if you don't
Right.
give them a prompt, if you don't give them a writing exercise and you just trust their 30, 60, 90-day plan, you're missing a big part of the pie because guess what? They are supposed to be the chief account executive. And so when you hire 4 or 5 AEs and they realize their sales leader can't sell, that's going to be
Mhm.
a big issue for you, right? So I
Yeah.
think those are the two things. Like, don't be afraid to take risks on up and comers. I've seen a lot of success there.
Yeah.
And then for your head of sales, don't be afraid to ask them to do very tactical on the ground things because that's what your team is going to need, when they
Yeah.
hire.
Yeah. I love that because even at the IC level, the amount of enterprise AE searches we've done where they bomb the presentation stage,
Oh, yeah.
bomb it. And at
Yeah.
first we're like, our clients must be overcomplicating this, right? There's no way this many enterprise sellers with these backgrounds are bombing. There's no
Yeah.
way. They crush it all the way through. Go in, have a conversation. They even show us the recording.
Ooh,
And what all the candidates that have all this selling experience did was pitch during a
crazy.
basic discovery. And it's really opened my eyes to how many, even when you prep them, right? How we are in such a new era of selling where there
Yes.
has to be value like we have never seen before. And the buyers are more educated, and you have to be curious. You have to, and you can't be curious. I talk about this all the time without empathy. Empathy is not
Mhm.
just about soft feelings for people, it's about understanding. And everyone, it's a skill that I don't think I realize like we are lacking in our
Oh,
culture.
totally.
And it's
Yes.
actually impacting current jobs even before AI comes in and might be able to do that even better, right? And so it resonates even with the leadership one, but just in seeing that where we've transitioned, it's been powerful to experience firsthand and go, oh my gosh, well, yeah, of course you moved on from them because they're not able to follow something as simple as just asking questions and not
Yeah.
their number one thing is don't pitch. That's all they did.
It is pretty crazy how that's happening, right? And it's a lot of bad behavior has been okay to
Yeah.
kind of go through because we've had so many products just sell and fly off the
Yeah.
shelves, right? So you
Yeah.
have AEs who have hit 200% quota who maybe haven't really gotten call coaching before,
Yeah.
right? And you mentioned empathy. I do think, like, especially in enterprise sales, the job is to make your buyer feel inspired and to trust you.
Mhm.
And so feelings and emotions are a crucial part of the sales process. And so if you
Yeah.
don't feel that from a candidate in a mock scenario, like, good luck with your prospects feeling it too,
Right.
right? And
Right.
the other thing, sorry, one more thing.
Yeah.
Time just flew, by the way. This is fun. But
I know.
a lot of founders are like, well, maybe this is just sales, right? Like, maybe I don't need to like, how many times have you heard this, right? Maybe
Yeah.
I don't need to like my VP of sales. Like, that's kind of what sometimes people convince themselves and they're like, that's what I'm looking for, actually. I don't want people to like this guy. I just want him to hit numbers. But
Yeah.
that's like
Yeah.
the wrong attitude, right? No, like, your
100%.
clients have to like this guy. That's like half
Right.
the sale. So,
Yeah. Yes. As
yeah,
does your team who is doing the selling.
exactly.
That
Exactly.
that that gets you the revenue.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
well, I know we're at the end. Could talk about this for a long time. Peter, where can people find you if they wanna reach out?
So yeah, I'm very active on LinkedIn, and then a pet project of mine that is becoming a priority now is I'm heavily investing in my YouTube channel. So it's at Peter on Sales. I just love the content creation process. So would appreciate if anybody listening to this could check it out
Yeah.
and see some of my videos there.
And Peter on is AHN, not on.
Yes,
So
AHN. That's right. Yep, yep, yep. Maybe I should change
oh
it to ON to make it easier, but
my gosh. No, I love it. Well, thanks for being with us today. For, more hiring insights, you can find that with other leaders on our Talent GTM podcast and other episodes. If today's conversation piques your interest, subscribe to our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or our website at blueprintexpansion.com and never miss an episode. Until next time, we'll see you. Thank you, Peter, so much for being here. This has been great.
thank you, Krissy. Appreciate it.
Thanks. Bye.